which is, Larry, give me a geography lesson. Ur of the Chaldees would be current day
Mesopotamia, which was Iraq.
Iraq.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And then he moved up to Haran with his father Terah. And God had called him out of the Ur of the Chaldees over to this new land. And so he packed up, took his father, his brother, and his nephew Lot, and his wife, and their families. And he moved up, going to Canaan, and got stuck in Haran. And so that's where his father died. And as soon as the father died, maybe it was just difficult traveling with an older parent. He continued the journey, and God called him again. And he went on down over into Canaan, which is, along the eastern shore of the Mediterranean, Palestine. And at that time, it was populated by a number of tribal people. At that time, there was no Jewish nation. There were no Hebrews before Abraham. He was the father. And so, but that was the land that God said, I'm going to give you this land someday. And he camped there, and he built an altar. And all this while, he's got this retinue of servants and probably some livestock and all their possessions. And he's got this caravan going. He was not a poor man, but God blessed him more as time went on. But all of that moved down, and he ended up building an altar. And it was an altar where God had promised him. It was an altar commemorating this promise, this covenant that God was making with him, to bless all the world through him. And as it came about, there was a drought. And during the drought, there became a famine. And during the famine, much like Joseph, several generations later, they went down to Egypt. And so Abraham took his whole family down to Egypt because there was food in Egypt. And I'm not sure what's going on with Sarah, but she must have been pretty good looking. Because when he went to Egypt, he knew that the Egyptians were going to fall for her. And they were going to be smitten with her beauty. Now remember, she's already old by the time they leave Haran. And when they get down that far, I don't know how old she is, but she's not a young woman anymore. And sure enough, when they get to Egypt, his thinking is, they'll kill me. That way she'll be free to be taken into their palace. The Pharaoh wants her. So he said, Sarah, lie. Tell them I'm your brother. That way they won't bother me. And I don't know if Abraham followed where that led, like if you tell them I'm your brother, and the Pharaoh takes you as his wife, then, where does that leave me, and what does that do to you? And so he said, well, you can't have children anyway, so you're not going to have a kid. And, hi, Sylvia, come on in. Thanks for coming. And so, anyway, so she does. She lies. She says, oh, he's my brother. And so Pharaoh takes her into the palace, and she becomes one of his wives. And all of a sudden, Pharaoh begins to have bad luck. His family gets sick. His animals die. I mean, it becomes a really bad thing. And he's wondering, what happened? And he begins to put two and two together and discovers that everything started to fall apart when Sarah came into the palace. And so he says, wait a minute. Who are you really? Who are you really? And then the truth comes out. Well, I'm Abraham's wife. And, Pharaoh is angry. He's angry. Why did you deceive me? Why did you do this? All this has befallen me. Get out. And he casts her out, and he tells Abraham to leave. And in order to get rid of Abraham, he kind of buys him off. So he gives him some more animals, gives him some more riches. So Abraham is getting rich off this gig, and so they go back. They go back to Canaan. Well, this whole story is about the promise. And the promise is that there will be a child, and through this child there will be families blessed. And Sarah is, I don't know the relationship between Abraham and Sarah, if they kept trying. At their age, did they believe God really, and they kept, at it? Hard to say. But whatever they were doing, it wasn't working. She was not getting pregnant, and she's got this thought in her mind that if I don't come up with a child, it makes all this move from our home in Ur of the Chaldees. It makes all of our agony going to Egypt, makes all this discomfort we're experiencing out here in the desert useless. You got to have a kid. And so she comes up with the idea of giving Abraham her servant, Hagar. Now, as odd as that may seem to us, in that culture, in that day, the Code of Hammurabi allowed for a servant in the household to become a surrogate wife or mother and bear a child. That would become the child of the woman who allowed it to happen, the mistress. And so, take my servant Hagar, lie with her, have a child. That child will then become our son, and this is the way we will fulfill the promise of God. Well, what's she doing? She's helping God out. In her own mind, it's not happening, it's not going to happen, and she's helping God out. So from her standpoint, Sarah is doing something good. And so then it happens, Hagar gets pregnant, and right away, things change. I don't care how legal it is, there's an emotional thing happening here. In this household, when the servant girl gets pregnant, and what do you call it, the owner or the wife cannot get pregnant, all of a sudden the servant girl doesn't have to draw water anymore, doesn't have to do dishes anymore, doesn't have to do the ironing, doesn't have to do all the hard labor, because they want to protect this child. And so here's this servant girl kind of taking it easy and giving Sarah haughty looks. Like, can't have a kid, right? I can do this. And so this sort of emotional break begins to happen between Hagar and Sarah. And so while she's pregnant and all this sort of jealousy or whatever competition is going on, Sarah begins to treat her very abusively, very bad. So much so that Hagar says, I'm out of here, I'm leaving. She says, I'd rather die in the desert than stay in this household. And so Hagar walks out into the desert, leaves Sarah and the family behind, and is willing to die out there rather than stay in this household under this abuse. While she's in the desert, God comes to her. And God says to her, I'm going to make you a promise. You are with child. That child will be a strong boy. And through your child, I will create a number of families that will populate the earth. They will be blessed in many ways. And you don't need to be afraid. I want you to return to Abraham and Sarah. Go back, have the child. I will be with you. So this is Hagar's promise from God, which is really interesting. So she goes back, the child is born, and Abraham names him Ishmael, which means God sees. God sees. And when Hagar was in the desert and God talked to her, she built an altar. And it was an altar that, I think it was something like, God hears me. God, this is the God who hears me. So all these altars have really special names, special meaning based on the significance of what happened at that place. So one of the questions I have here is about altars in our lives. If you were to build altars in your life of significant spiritual experiences, where would you build them and what would they be about? You can be thinking of that. I'll come back to that. But we all have those times in our life that were significant spiritually. Okay, so Hagar goes back. Ishmael is born. Legally, she becomes sort of this now becomes a blended family. Okay, now we have a stepmother relationship, a stepchild relationship that we would know it as in this family. So, you know, a lot of us can relate to that. And there's a question here about families that have that kind of blended relationships within them. So, okay, time goes on. There's a lot of things in between here that I'm not covering having to do with Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah and all of that. That's not germane to what we want to study, so I'm going to let that go. But back to Sarah and Abraham. One day, in the middle of the day when it's hot in there, you know, it's the desert, nobody's moving, everybody's taking a nap. Three men, I call them men, but they're three visitors. And they were divine beings of some kind, but they looked apparently human. And they come to Abraham's tent, and Abraham, already being an old man by this time, he's 99 years old at this point. He was 75 when he left Haran. And his wife Sarah was 65. So now this is some years later, 99 years old, and these men come, and I can just picture this old dude with sandals and robes rushing around, because the main thing you want to do when you have guests is what? Give them food. Give them food, hospitality. So he's ordering people, come, let's get a calf out there, and let's go do a calf, and then do this and do that, and he's just rushing around because you've got to feed these people, and he's not sure who they are or why they're there, but he knows there's something special about them. And so they have this meal, and these three men indeed are messengers from God. And some people go so far as to say God himself was there. Well, God was there in a certain way. So the message comes, and it's a reaffirmation of the promise. I'm going to bless you with a son. You will be the father of a great nation, through which I will bless all the families of the earth. And a year from now, this son will be born. Inside the tent, because women were not allowed to be seen when guests were present, Sarah is hiding behind a flap. And when they hear these men say, a year from now, your wife will give birth to a child, Sarah goes, and breaks up in laughter. She just can't contain herself. And, and so, whatever you, it's 85 to 89 years old. I mean, so there you go. And so, the guy outside, the visitor, says, why is she laughing? Now, she was laughing within herself, but he knows she's laughing. And she protests. She says, no, but I wasn't laughing. And they know better. And so they reaffirm the promise. A year from now, she will give birth. Well, that must have started them off again, because a year later, she's pregnant, and she gives birth. Isaac is born. Who can tell me what the name Isaac means?
Laughter.
Laughter. Yeah, it means laughter.
Yitzchak.
So when you think of Isaac, think of laughter. He's a child of laughing. So not just laughter, but happiness. Okay? Because she said, shall I have this pleasure in my old age to bear a child? Because all her life she's been childless. All her life, that's what she wanted. Never could happen. And now it does. Well, all of a sudden this changes the equilibrium in the home. Imagine you have Ishmael here. He's 14 years old by now. And now you got this baby. But Ishmael, being the firstborn, is in line to inherit everything. You know, the double portion of all the goods and stuff that Abraham wanted. And Sarah says, no, this can't happen. I'm not going to allow this. And so once again, she sends Hagar and Ishmael out into the desert. Now Abraham's caught in the middle of this, you can imagine, because Abraham is quite attached to his son, Ishmael. And probably to Hagar at some level. But Sarah says, no, they're not going to be in my home. I want them out of here. And so Abraham, it's so interesting to picture this. I could see it in a movie. Abraham gets together food and drink and gives it and arranges it so Hagar and Ishmael can carry it. And he prepares for them survival to go out into the desert. And they're out into the desert, and finally they go through their food, they go through their drink, they're done, and she thinks they're going to die. All of a sudden, and she puts Ishmael under a tree, under a shade tree, and she goes off a distance to weep and to cry and to die. Again, God comes. And God says, this isn't going to happen. You aren't going to die. I will take care of you. And God provided for them food and drink in the desert and led them out of that place down to Egypt, where Hagar found a nice Egyptian girl for Ishmael. And he got married. And out of Ishmael's marriage to this girl came 12 tribes. These are the 12 tribes of Ishmael. And who do you think they became? Of course, the Arab nations. Out of the half-brother of Isaac, out of whom came the Jewish nation. 12 tribes of the Jews. So, when you look at the Mideast and you see all the contention there, it was there from the very beginning. Very beginning. And half-brothers who never did get along. From mothers who didn't especially like each other. Okay, so Isaac is in the family. Of course, he's the prize. And he's cared for, and he grows into a young boy. And then God comes with this blockbuster demand to Abraham. I want you to take Isaac, your only son Isaac, this is by now, the other one's gone, and I want you to take him and Mount Moriah and sacrifice him to me. Whoa, wait a minute, God, wait. This is irrational, doesn't make sense. What is going on? And so, but Abraham, and this is the true mark of Abraham, immediate obedience. And so he takes Isaac. He doesn't tell him what's happening. He just takes Isaac. He has him carry some wood, and they go off together, and they're going up the mountain. And you know the story, how they got up so high, and Isaac said, Dad, here's the altar. Here's the wood. You got the fire. You got the knife. Where's the sacrifice? Where's the animal? And Abraham knows what the kid doesn't know, that Isaac is the sacrifice. But he says God will provide himself a sacrifice. And, the picture is, and you can remember it from Sunday school days and so forth, is that Isaac submits to Abraham's faith and is laid on the altar. And as Abraham raises his knife to plunge it into his son, his only son, the son of promise through which all this covenant is going to take place, a voice comes. And the voice says, stop. Stop. Now I know how deep your faith is in me. It was a test. It was a test. There are questions here about that too. So all of these incidents, I have some questions for reflection that would help us discuss maybe. So God says stop, and Abraham looks over. There's a ram. There's an animal caught in the bramble bush, there's the sacrifice. He gives the sacrifice and, of course, completes it. Well, they go back down the mountain, and to cut to the end, Sarah dies when she's about 27 years old, I think, 127. And Abraham mourned her. He wept, and he wept, and he wept. He just, he was a broken-hearted man. Because she followed him all this way. I left out a second incident where they were in the court of Abimelech, and a king named Abimelech. And Abimelech looks at Sarah and says, I'd like her in my harem. And I don't know how old she was, but I mean, she must have been amazing, to keep it up that long. And so there she is. And Abraham again, the second time, says, lie to him, tell him I'm your brother. And she does. And she goes into that court. All kinds of bad things happen. It's a repeat of Egypt. And Abimelech comes out and says, what's going on here? Who are you really? And the story comes out. Well, the real story is, and Abraham fesses up here, said, we have the same father, but we have different mothers. So actually, it was kind of like a half-truth that he was her brother, because he was a half-brother. Same father, different mothers. Interesting. Yeah. Well, okay, so cut to the end. She dies. And what does Abraham do? Now remember, he's about 137 years old. He goes out and finds a wife, whose name is Keturah. And out of Keturah comes about 6 additional sons. So he ends up with lots of kids at the end. And in biblical numbers, he dies when he's 175 years old. Yeah. And Isaac, it says, Isaac and Ishmael came together and buried their father. So I don't know if there was any kind of reconciliation or recognition at that point, at the end of life. But what an epic story. What an epic story. If you go to the New Testament, I'm going to flip to the back page where we read the responsive conversation. From the book of Hebrews, Abraham had faith, so he obeyed God. God called him to go to a place he would later receive as his own. So he went, he did, even though he didn't know where he was going. Because of his faith, he made his home in the land God had promised him. He was like an outsider in a strange country. There's the risk, comfort zone. He lived there in tents. So did Isaac and Jacob. They received the same promise he did. Abraham was looking forward to the city that has foundations. He was waiting for the city that God planned and built. Abraham had faith. So God made it possible for him to become a father. He became a father even though he was too old. Sarah also was too old to have children, but Abraham believed that the one who made the promise was faithful. Abraham was past the time when he could have children, but many children came from that one man. They were as many as the stars of the sky. They were as many as the sand on the seashore. No one could count them. And the next one in Galatians, think about Abraham. Scripture says Abraham believed God. God accepted Abraham because he believed. So his faith made him right with God. So you see, those who have faith are children of Abraham. Long ago, Scripture knew that God would make non-Jews right with himself by believing in him. He announced the good news ahead of time to Abraham. He said, all nations will be blessed because of you. So those who have faith are blessed along with Abraham. He was a man of faith. Over and over again. What was Abraham all about? I want you to leave your country. I'm going to give you a promise. Okay, let's go. Let's go. I want you to take your son, sacrifice him. All right, let's go. A man of faith. That's why he was great. That's why God chose Abraham to be the founder of the Jewish nation, the Hebrew people. I'm going to stop. First of all, any comments or reactions or responses to that story?
when you were talking about the voice coming that stopped Abraham from sacrificing Isaac, I wondered if Isaac heard the same voice, because that might have been easier on, I don't know the scripture that closely, but thought it might have been easier on Isaac if it's like, okay, this has all been about God, and
Yeah.
you know, since Isaac was going to carry on after Abraham,
That's right.
so.
Yeah. Good question. I don't know that the scripture gives us a clear answer on that.
Yeah, the translation said there came a voice from heaven, and they could have both heard it.
Could have been audible, could have
Yeah.
been internal. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to go through the questions on the front because it's always good to sort of process that story through our own experience, through our own lives. And so the first question we've dealt with, but there's some others there. And one is there a promise of God that keeps you going when times are tough? Because it was this promise from God that kept Abraham going. And in our own lives, sometimes we cling to a word, a scripture verse, something that, so we keep coming back to. Then the next one, Abraham built many altars wherever he had a significant spiritual encounter with God. If you were to identify some altars from your spiritual journey, think about why it was a significant moment and where would they be located. The next one, what is your experience with living in a blended family, whether as parent or sibling? If you have lived in a blended family, what are some of the challenges and what are some of the blessings of a blended family? And then another one, what is your experience with favoritism as a parent or as a child? How did or does it affect your relationships in the family now? What were your feelings as a favored or unfavored child in the family? Have you ever felt jealousy in your family relationships? Have you ever felt rejected or abandoned as a child or as an adult in your most intimate relationships? What advice would you give to somebody who had a stepmother like Sarah? And in your own family right now, what is one relationship that you would like to hold before God for healing, reconciliation, growth, or guidance? Now, what possession would be the hardest for you to give up? I'm thinking of the sacrifice now. Have you ever felt like you were being tested by God to see how you would respond? How did you do? And finally, at the heart of this story is this question. Is anything too difficult for God? And that was asked by the 3 visitors that came during that day. Is anything too difficult for God? Is there a need or situation in your life that seems unsolvable and impossible? Using this phrase as a prayer and applying it to your life situation, listen for the still small voice of God answering the question. It can become a mantra of faith with repeated use. Maybe that's something more private for us to take home with us. Is anything too difficult for God? Keep repeating that and then stay still and listen. See what comes. Now we have maybe 10, 15 minutes left. And so I'd like to invite you to, again, select from among these questions something that might have shimmered for you, something that might have said, oh, I'm thinking of this, I'm thinking of this. That's one way we could do this. Otherwise, I could just go through this and ask for responses. How would you prefer to do this? With another partner or with the group? The group, the whole group. Okay, well, let's go through and see where we go with this. Let me just ask this question. Is there a promise of God that keeps you going through time when times are tough? Some scripture that